Hello and welcome back to the third rail. You will have guessed from the thumbnail that we are going to compare two locomotives today. If you follow the channel, you'll know that one of them doesn't belong to my collection theme. So let me start today's video with a bit of context. In the early days of HO, what Märklin and most manufacturers were selling were not just toys, but first and foremost a system. The aim was clear: lock the customer in to generate repeat purchases. And if there was one thing Märklin could do, it was selling, so it managed to establish its own ecosystem and saw no incentive in joining the two-rail bandwagon when it became fashionable in the late 1940s, early 1950s. The Märklin system and its simplicity remained a key selling point over the years and played a non-negligible role in keeping the company afloat to this day. Until the mid-1980s, Märklin focused on mass production, so only offered a relatively limited choice of models, albeit of excellent quality, if you base your judgment on ease of use, reliability and durability. Realism was a different matter, something the company even stopped using as a marketing argument in the mid-1960s. The models looked the part, but could be relatively crude in places, sometimes even very crude, as sturdiness always took priority over detail. Märklin made up for this with its pricing policy. Believe it or not, it was not the most expensive among the premium brands of the time. This formula made it difficult for third parties. As a result, only a handful of competitors produced items for the Märklin system, usually by means of three-rail axles that could be retrofitted to their existing choice of wagons or coaches. Very few went as far as releasing locomotives, and these were usually filling gaps in the Märklin offering to avoid going head-to-head with the beast. This was still a risky endeavour, as the release of a Märklin version was almost guaranteed to beat any competing model, whatever the level of detail or craftsmanship. This happened on a few occasions over the years, and as a result there is very little overlap, allowing a direct comparison in the period of the Märklin production I collect. I thought we'd have a look at such an example today. I bought this Fleischmann 1179, a Class 50 of the Deutsche Bundesbahn with a bathtub tender. And if you'd like, you can stay with me for a bit as I put it through its paces and see how it stands against its Märklin rival. Quick thing before we set off: if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe and alert button before leaving today. I also love to read your comments. Super thanks are also available if you'd like to support the channel a bit more. Whatever the option you choose will be much appreciated. Many thanks. Now, on to our topic. The Fleischmann 1179 was produced between 1986 and 2003. It is a three-rail version of model number 4179 released by Fleischmann in 1984. I am not a Fleischmann expert, but my understanding is that all Fleischmann BR50s produced until the early 2000s share the same locomotive tooling, initially developed for model number 1163 in 1968. These models are all tender-driven and were initially sold with either a standard or cap tender for the Deutsche Bundesbahn version, and a standard tender only for the international versions. The bathtub tender was a 1980s development with a different motorization and transmission. Fleischmann's BR50 predates Märklin's, the 3084 with a cap tender, released for the catalogue year 74-75. This release probably led Fleischmann to withdraw its equivalent 3-rail version, the 1175, in 1976. Märklin would also reuse their tooling on many versions until the early 2000s. One of these versions is the 3315 released for catalogue year 1987-88. You might have seen this one before on the channel, among others in a dedicated new additions video. I put a little link at the top if you're interested. Märklin sold this model until 1995. So let's have a closer look at the model. I'll take it out of its box. Gosh, it's a bit heavy. It looks and feels like it is a complete metal construction, body and tender. I wasn't expecting that. Alright, we're on the presentation rail. What a beauty! Let's have a look around first. It all looks in good shape and very pretty indeed. The first thing I am drawn to is the see-through cab. Very nice. Then we have the valve gear. Look at how fine everything is. Lovely. And the boiler is very nice too. There's lots of detail. And plenty of rivets on site. Yes, looks very good. Now let's bring in the Märklin 3315. The models have different boilers, so we can't compare like for like directly. But from the point of view of dimensions, both locos are roughly the same length. The Fleischmann might be slightly longer and also larger, I think, and taller. It might not be exactly 1:87 scale, maybe 1:85 or something like that. So on the Märklin model, the cab is not see-through. That's kind of usual. Pardon the yellowed windows here. I might need to do something about this at some point, but I don't know what to do. If you know, leave a comment. Now, the reason we have no see-through cab on the Märklin model is that Märklin needed the space for the motor, which is located just under the cab here. Looking at the boiler, the rivets and lines are equivalent on both models, I'd say. Maybe the rivets are featured a bit better on Fleischmann's version. The wind deflectors, on the other hand, are better represented on the Fleischmann model. We've got 2 support brackets and we've got 2 rows of rivets on the surface. On the Märklin model, we have no rivets on the surface and we only have a single bracket. Now on the top of the boiler we have a casting line going across the entire length in the center of the Fleischmann model. That's a bit disappointing considering the quality of the rest of the boiler. And we have none of that on the Märklin model. So if I try to put myself in a model shop in 1988, and if I'd had to choose between the 2 models, I would have had a dilemma. Both models look beautiful in my view. The valve gear and cabs might have pushed me towards Fleischmann at the time, but this would have come at a price. Based on the information I could find, the Fleischmann model was about 10% more expensive at roughly 300 Deutschmark. Märklin sold theirs at 277 Mark 50. These are both list prices, so you might have found them a bit more expensive or cheaper depending on the shop. But looks are only one thing. Let's see how the locos behave on the layout. And there we are. So we'll go straight down to business. We have the Fleischmann on the track. Let's give it a bit of power. Can you hear that? Yes, that's my point. This thing is absolutely whisper quiet. We have directional lighting. Nice first impression. Let's see if this thing can crawl. Look at that. The transformer setting is just at 50, which is very low. Oh, very impressive. Now, just for comparison, here's the 3315. We'll do a simple back and forth first. And we have our usual Märklin racket. And you'll notice we have no directional lighting here. The front headlights are always on. Now that's a bit pointless, but let's try a crawl. Transformer setting 50, 60, 70, 75, 80, 85. Not great. Now backwards it starts a bit earlier. Yeah, 65, 70 something. So I think I could improve that with by fiddling with the brushes a bit. But it's not as good as the Fleischmann in any case. Now let's have a quick look at the chassis. Märklin did its usual here and made an articulated chassis. We have 4 traction tires and we have gears on all driving wheels. Now Fleischmann, we have a solid chassis, maybe a bit thinner. The wheels have a lot of side play to allow tight curves. Now the locomotive is standard driven as mentioned earlier, and we have 4 traction tires here too. I'll show you the inside of the tender while we are here. Yep, the tender is definitely made of metal. The chassis of the tender is quite weighty too, so this thing really means business. And we have a beefy looking DC motor, and its power is transmitted to the wheels using worm gears, which would probably explain the nice crawl. Now I believe this motorization and configuration only came with the bathtub tender we have here. The loco is in excellent condition technically. I serviced it already. Well, I lubricated it. I did find a minor issue in the process. I had to adjust the truck spring at the front. It had weakened and the leading wheels were not adhering to the track. Now that bit's quite important if you want your locomotive to stay on the track. Okay, let's put things back together. Right, with everything working as it should, let's see how it behaves on the track. I'll send it first on its own. I cannot believe how quiet this thing is. So curves are not a problem. And the ramps, bridge, etc. are fine too. Okay, let's continue the comparison with the train this time. So I have chosen some tank wagons because they have a good amount of weight, but more importantly, they all have metal wheel bearings that generate a lot of drag, so that should be a good test. So we're going to start with Märklin first. Let's try and do a slow start. Yeah, it's kind of, it's got an on-off feel to it. You can't really go up gently. For the same reason we saw earlier when we were trying to crawl. The motor really needs a bit of oomph to get going. Okay, now let's look at the Fleischmann. Look at that. Transformer at 60 and we are moving already. Very impressive. Now let's compare the behavior in various parts of the layout. I have set the speed at about 115 for both logos. So let's start with curves. Radius 2 first. Märklin. And now Fleischmann. Then radius 1, Märklin. And Fleischmann. Now let's look at a straight section of track in the station. Märklin. And now Fleischmann. Now I'd say the Fleischmann is a tad slower, but both locos keep their speed. All pretty comparable. Noise aside, of course. Good stuff. Now the elevated section. So we have the same speed setting as before. Märklin first. We have a slight progressive deceleration on the way up, and we are picking up speed again on the upper level. And then going down, we have this typical runaway effect. Okay, now Fleischmann. Now here we have a sharp slowdown at the very beginning of the ramp. The speed then stabilizes and remains practically even. There might be a slight slowdown on the curved section at the top of the ramp, and the speed picks up immediately on the upper level. And on the way down, the loco keeps a constant speed. There might be a slight acceleration, but it's not as pronounced as with the Märklin loco. Well, that's very nice. Now let's do a little torque test. The slowest I can get the Märklin train up the ramp is at speed setting 100. Anything lower than that and the loco will grind to a halt before the curved bit at the top. See, we've got a bit of wheel spin, but we're making it. Now the Fleischmann does much better here. We're at speed setting 85. Yes, this loco is a true torque monster. Right, enough torture. let me grab something more appropriate out of the drawer for the Fleischmann logo. One moment, please. And we're back. I put together a 60s style mixed train. When I first looked at this model, I was very enthusiastic about its looks, and I even went as far as writing the Cosmetic comparison before filming anything, based on what I remembered of the 3315. I had to throw that bit away once I had put both models side by side. The Märklin model wasn't actually as crude as I remembered it, and both are equally finely detailed and quite elegant in my view. From a cosmetic perspective, whilst there are differences between the two, both also have negatives that would even the score in my view. But the 1179 really shines in terms of performance. We are simply in another world and way ahead of what Märklin could do in terms of noise level, smoothness and low speed characteristics in 1987-1998. But it is not perfect. For example, going downhill on a ramp, the worm gears used for the transmission will act as a brake and help the locomotive maintain an even speed. This is quite nice, as Märklin locos tend to run away in this scenario, but the braking effect will end up locking the transmission and the locomotive will hop forward. The behavior on stopping sections is also not great. The worm gear drive will lock as soon as power is cut and the locomotive will stop abruptly, which can cause derailments. I use braking sections on my layout, so this is not a problem, but not an ideal behavior nevertheless. The model can handle M-track, which was the most widespread Märklin track system at the time. I did have to stiffen the front truck spring for the model to operate reliably on the ramps of my layout. It is not perfectly level and the track is not screwed down, so I give that aspect a break, but it's not something I ever have to do on Märklin models. I cannot comment on durability, as this model has not been used intensively, but it is nearly 40 years old and it is still working perfectly. The model is well put together in any case. So taking everything into consideration, I'd say that the Fleischmann 1179 would be the winner of this head-to-head, but just by a whisker. That was it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video, hopefully enough for you to give it a like, or maybe subscribe if you haven't already done so, or even send a super thanks my way if you feel the video was worth it. Thanks as ever for your support, and bye for now.